just found a video from March 30, 2023. It's from CNBC titled, "Why Tipping is So Out of Control in the US." So I'm going to go through this video. I haven't watched it yet. I've never done a reaction video before. I'm going to throw on the headphones and we'll get this puppy going.
When was the last time you purchased something and you weren't asked for a tip? Yeah, I can't remember either. Tipping culture has gotten out of control. I get to the pay window and she's like, "How much do you want to tip?" What am I going to tip you for?
Yeah, I'm not tipping at a drive-thru.
Oh my god. Tips have been on the rise for decades. During the 1950s, people commonly tipped 10% of the bill.
By the 1970s and 1980s, that jumped to 15%.
Money was worth more back in the
Today,
day.
people tip
Inflation's a
anywhere from
bitch.
15 to 25%. According to one 2022 survey, consumers said they tipped more than 21% on average.
Nowadays, there are people who argue 20% is kind of a cheap tip.
While the percentage that consumers are tipping at full-service restaurants in the past couple of years has remained about the same, in the fourth quarter of 2022, the number of tips provided at full-service restaurants grew 17%.
Meanwhile, the tip frequency at quick service restaurants such as coffee shops and fast food chains rose 16% during the same time period.
Tipping at fast food? Is that a thing?
Nationwide is something that is known as tipflation. At every opportunity, we're being presented with a tablet that's asking us how much we'd like to tip.
In many cases, not only replacing the old-fashioned tip jars that you could feel good about throwing some spare change into, but actually suggesting tip amounts, often right in front of the employee receiving that tip. Not to mention also your dinner date and the dozen or so people standing behind you in line. And it's gone beyond just the tablets. The other day I was using the Hopper app to book a hotel, and it wasn't until I confirmed my payment that I realized my hotel was $10 more expensive. It turns out, Hopper assumed I wanted to add a tip, and I had to go back to a prior page in order to opt out.
Tipflation refers to not just that we're tipping more, but we're tipping everyone for everything.
You're being guilted into tipping on something that is not technically a service. It's someone simply doing their job. In those situations, consumers are feeling resentful. Where do you draw the line?
Okay, I want to bring up a point right here. Doing your job is not worth a tip, right? He said it's service, right? So the service is the part where the tip comes in. It's not just the performing of a task. I'll maybe talk about this later, but it's the service that's involved with. So tipping is 100% a reaction to customer service, not just how well you did your job.
TIP stands for to ensure promptness. Tipping may go back as far as the Roman era, but according to most experts, the practice likely has its origins in medieval Europe.
Noblemen taking passage on roads would throw coins to the rubble to ensure safe passage. One theory is that it evolved in eating and drinking establishments as a way to forestall envy. That when you're eating and drinking, you're having fun, and the people who are serving you are not.
Fast forward to the 19th century.
Because they're at work.
Waiters
They're
who
not supposed to be
received a
having
full
fun.
wage
They're
went
at
on
work.
strike demanding higher wages. They were replaced with women who employers could pay less.
Okay, right here they're trying to sneak in some gender wage gap shit. I mean, I know they're talking historically, but they want that to be on your mind. And it's just, come on, it's been refuted so many times. It's like, it's not even worth talking about.
A decade later, there was the population of newly freed slaves. The idea from these restaurant owners was that they were giving the luxury or privilege of a white person's tips. That was without a full wage.
Ironically,
Wait, are we calling tip
exploded
workers
in the United
slaves
States,
now? Are we
it
equating
became less
this?
common
Come
in Europe
on.
and was
Replaced with service charges.
While the first federal minimum wage law was passed in 1938, it wasn't until almost 3 decades later when the tip minimum wage was established. In 1991, the federal minimum wage for tipped employees was set at $2.13, which is what it remains at as of March 2023.
As far as I know, the United States is the only country that exempts tipped workers from having to receive the full minimum wage.
In 43 states,
It is
The only
legal to pay
country?
tipped
That's pretty
workers
crazy.
less than
the standard minimum wage, because tips presumably make up that difference. In recent years, you might have found yourself asking, do I tip this barista for pouring that hot coffee? What about when I'm going to a restaurant and picking up takeout? And how much do I tip that doorman, driver, or dog walker? When those in the service industry were feeling the brunt during the coronavirus pandemic, consumers started tipping for things they never had before. And the percentage of remote transactions when tipping was an option in which the consumer tipped soared from about 46% before the pandemic to around 86% in January 2020.
Pandemic
If
economy!
people were willing to tip the person delivering food to their home 30%, why not ask if they'd like to tip when they come pick up?
During the pandemic, businesses who lost a lot of traditional customers and transactions were looking for alternative ways to make up that income. And if asking for tips was one way to do it, they were willing to try it.
And since then, that ask hasn't dissipated.
Another reason consumers say they feel pressured to tip more, they're being asked to tip prior to service completion.
asking for
What?
a tip beforehand is almost like a bribe,
Yeah, right?
right? It's
It's like, oh, I'm not going to give good service to this cheap asshole, right?
Less good work.
Customers might not be concerned about the barista's perception of their tip before getting their latte, but what about the mechanic repairing your car? I don't know about you, but I'm certainly going to make sure to tip them well to ensure my safety.
Oh, she's gonna cave. Oh, so she said, I'm just gonna be held hostage and just deal with it. That's what she said.
Another reason consumers are tipping more, newer technologies. Kiosks and tablets with 3 large tipping suggestions that pop up on the screen in front of you. 3 options chosen by the business.
I have not yet been to the restaurant where they recommend 5, 10, or 15% for quick takeout. It normally always starts at 15.
It's like 15, 18, 20.
Sometimes even starting at 20, 25, and up to 30.
According to a 2022 creditcards.com survey, 22% of respondents said when they're presented with various suggested tip amounts, they feel pressured to tip more than they normally would.
They use those options as an indication of kind of what the normative range is and feel compelled to tip within that range. So the more you ask, the more you get.
The 3 prominent companies with that trendy, sleek look are Square, Toast, and Clover. They launched a bit more than a decade ago to help businesses run smarter, faster, and easier, all in one point of sale or POS systems.
In
Handy
some
for
cases,
small businesses,
fewer
for
fees,
sure.
So it's less of a burden to accept multiple credit cards, no long-term contracts, and multiple other useful tools,
I
including
mean, I see people at the
inventory and
farmer's
employee
market running
management.
Square, you know?
They got credit card processing into the hands of individuals and very small merchants. Square did a great job. It's been a tremendous growth story. That's half of the business today.
Do you think these companies are responsible for this turn of events that we've seen with tipping?
I would say they could take some of the credit for helping restaurants gather more tips.
Robert Sanchez manages Eli's Essentials in New York City.
Okay, hang on,
One
I
of
gotta
the
pause.
business's locations
Okay, he said to help restaurants gather more tips. Okay, if you work in a restaurant, you know that's not what happens. Restaurants don't gather tips. The tips don't go to the restaurant. When a tip hits the table, that server that picks it up, that's on them. And it's a lot of it is kind of an honor system as to how much it was, where it goes, if it gets claimed or not. So I think that might be important later on to distinguish, though, that tips do not belong to the restaurant. Nope, you're not tipping the restaurant. The restaurant legally, I don't think, can even touch the money. So you're tipping the server, which we already decided, or we already established, right, that is based on service, is based on customer service. So to say you're tipping the restaurant implies that you're tipping for the, you know, for the building, for the ambiance, you know, for everything that goes into it. Like you're tipping, you know, into the help us pay for the plumbing bill or something. That's not the case. People should know that a tip is 100% to the server. The house doesn't get a piece of the tip.
This toast, while the other uses this. He says the storefront that uses Toast sees more and higher tips.
The Clover, Square, and Toast terminals to a consumer are very easy to use. Big buttons, big areas to sign the tip, an easy way to tip a different amount if you don't like the starting at 20% option. There are others that do it, they're just not as cool looking.
We've come a long way from being able to just throw your spare change into the jar by the cash register.
The new tablets have turned what used to be a sin of omission, I simply didn't put money into the tip jar, into a sin of commission. I have to hit a button and say no tip. I have to actively choose not to tip.
Whereas before,
Mind control.
not
Mind
tipping was
control.
a kind of a
Passive thing.
Glancing at the tip jar could have also been a way to get a sense of how many others are tipping on that service and maybe even how much money. Meanwhile, not only can the tipping options be customized, but the tipping feature can be disabled as well. So it's the merchant's choice to ask or not to ask for tips.
From the business side, it makes employees want to perform better and do a better job. It's seriously significant. It really pays for the software. You'd be a foolish business owner not to install it based on what the numbers display. Even a mammoth company as large as Starbucks has decided that they need to sink or swim, and the best way for them to do that is to offer the tip screen.
Starbucks rolled out the tipping feature in stores in September 2022.
It's one thing to have a happy staff. It's another thing to have customers that are feeling resentful. I think it's a calculation.
I'm resentful of a $7 coffee.
Do you think that they're somewhat going to start seeing that they're getting lower tips because people are paying tips for so many services, or they're resentful of the act of tipping in general?
I think that's a very real danger. During and immediately post-pandemic, by restaurants doing all sorts of fees, their tips were actually going down because consumers were saying, well, if I'm paying for the health insurance, and I'm paying for inflation, and I'm paying for this, and I'm paying for that, enough is enough. The more you levy these line items onto consumers, guess who's being penalized? It's the one area that's still quasi-discretionary, which is the tip.
I went door to door talking with waitresses, bartenders, and baristas, and while they wanted to remain anonymous, they told me it's happening already. With inflation and being prompted for tips left and right, they say customers have already started to tip less and sometimes not at all. A 2022 study found that 17% of Americans are tipping less because of inflation.
Because of inflation, they say, right off. But didn't we say that tipping is also based on service? If you go to a restaurant and they make you wear a mask, they make you social distance, you know, you can only be at half capacity or at 2/3 capacity, all this, you know, they've already taken away, you know, like smoking on patios and loud music in places. So, I mean, like, what's left for the restaurant experience? I mean, it's already like they're looking at restaurants as nothing more than a place where the food comes out of, you know, and like, and I think most restaurant people, most certainly restaurant owners, will tell you that they're going for more than that. It's an experience, it's a night out. It's a time to be waited on, hand and foot. And that's kind of the whole point. So it's not really just about inflation. It's like, what have all of these penalties that have been put on restaurants, what does that pay out down the line? So we had to do these things. We had to put up plastic and plexiglass everywhere. Well, now it turns out that people aren't enjoying themselves as much. So yeah, inflation's bad and we are tipping more, but
However, 10% report tipping more. At the same time, more than half of Americans, or 60%, want to do away with tipping entirely. The extent of pandemic-influenced generosity has also gone down. 43% of consumers typically tipped servers 20% or more in 2022, compared to 56% of consumers in 2021. Meanwhile, the average tip for full-service restaurants has gone down only slightly during the same time period. According to Toast, 19.6% in the fourth quarter of 2022, compared to 19.8% in 2021.
Again,
However,
full
according
service.
to surveys
What's happening to
conducted in those
service
same
during
years,
this time, this economy?
respondents said they're tipping higher percentages.
Like if you're in the Pacific
21.2%
Northwest, service
and
sucks, man. Last time I was up there,
respectively.
garbage,
It can
garbage.
genuinely hurt the
People who truly rely on gratuities for their livelihood. I firmly believe that the tipping invasion we are experiencing right now, I think it's a net negative for society.
Yeah.
And with that tablet at just about every counter, no matter where you go, the question is, where's the tipping point? I'm wondering how long before I'm tipping my doctor after an annual physical. If you want to seem especially generous after an exceptional meal, you might decide to go big and tip 30%. But it's a cycle. As more people seeking to make a good impression then up their tips to 30%, maybe even 35%, what becomes a generous tip?
I have to believe tips are going to go up from where they are today. But I also think there's got to be a logical ceiling somewhere. I just don't know where it is.
Okay, that's interesting stuff here. Right there at the end, 30%. So a tip of 30%, you're basically paying the food cost above and beyond what you already paid for the retail food cost. None of that's going to go to the chefs. None of that's going to the restaurant like we already established. So why does this have to be, it's all about the peer pressure and it's all about the looking good in front of the person that you're going to do. Why are people so worried about impressing a server? Like in any other conversation, like servers are looked down on, like it's the job that you can get without any skills. It's the job that teenagers and, get. It's the job that, when you're in between gigs, you can go get a job serving or bartending somewhere, So why is it all of a sudden now we have to impress these people? Weren't we all just told, most of us, that we're non-essential workers? So is this like a guilt thing on behalf of the public now? So CNBC made some interesting points here, I guess. I don't really like the overall thrust of where they're going with it. They're saying everything is it's economic and it's peer pressure. But what also is driving, larger tips in restaurants, tips are generally based on like, a percentage of sales, or the cost of the dish, based on the cost of the goods. And so as these things continue to go up, of course, check averages are going up. Of course, tip averages are going up. Of course, that's going to happen. But I think the point that they missed here with the tipping point is, when is the value going to be lost? Like with the kitchen, like we're already at a point where a good server makes twice as much as a decent cook or a chef. I mean, like, I've worked in positions, as a salaried chef, as a member of senior management, and I make less than the servers. I make less than the bartenders, for sure. I've known some six-figure bartenders. I've known some $70,000, $80,000 servers. I ain't never made that much as a chef. Ain't nobody ever paid me that much. And this is on top of the fact that how many hours do servers working? Like, what's an average server shift? 4 hours, 5, maybe 6 might be a long one. Whereas the chef's going in working 8 at least, maybe 10, 12, 15. I mean, let's be honest. It's sometimes of the year, some of us are working 75, 80 hours a week, if not more than that. Right? And so in this economy now, as things are changing, we now have servers making more than ever, people getting tipped more than ever. When you have the check averages going up, you have the tips going up, but the restaurant's not making more money. As a matter of fact, the restaurant is making less money than ever before because of the cost of goods going up, because of the cost of labor going up. So the value is nowhere. And I'm not knocking servers here. I mean, like I said, you play your role, and a good server is not nearly the same thing as a bad server, and we all know that. And I'm not knocking it. I got love for servers. I got family in the front of the house, bartenders and servers, But even they'll acknowledge that, there's got to be some sort of value, or at least perceived value, in what's going on. So if in restaurants and anywhere that you're going to have a server, tips are just going to go up, and it's just the check value or check averages are just going to go up and up and up, but there's no value coming with it, I'd say that's already the tipping point. I mean, you're going to get people that are only going to go to takeout or order their delivery, and they'll maybe, tip the guy at the counter a couple of bucks because they're like, well, at least I didn't have to tip a server, $40 or 30% according to that guy. This is having huge impacts on our industry, and we have to at least be open to talk about it. I know a lot of restaurants are trying to go tipless. I know that's been a thing. I'm not sure how that's working out. Like I made a mention before, being in the Pacific Northwest, I was in a place where servers made $15 an hour but didn't accept tips, and I got to tell you, the service was garbage everywhere I went. The restaurants were dirty. I had an empty glass most of the time, and at multiple establishments, multiple places. So, that's the kind of thing that comes with that. So like, it has to be a hustle. We don't want to do away with tip culture, I don't think, because that's the hustle. Whereas I said before, when money hits the table, it belongs to the server. I think money should probably belong to the restaurant. It makes the most sense to me that would then be divvied up based on, I don't know what the metrics would be, hours worked, position held, difficulty of position, that kind of thing. And so it seems like that money would get bounced around and benefit not just individual servers, but it would go to the establishment itself. This is the money we're raking in. Because our servers are doing such great service, we're raking in buku. And I know the danger there would be like the owners would never give it back, the servers would never get it. I think that's like a race to the bottom mentality where you just assume that people are gonna dick you over all the time. And I think if you were to move into a different model of business, I think then you could actually move into like contractual obligations with people, so it wouldn't be like, oh, well, whereas now it's the servers declaring how much came in gratuity. It would be the owners declaring gratuity. So, but there's ways that things could be done, and safe checks and fail safes and all kinds of things could be done. I'm not the one with the answer. I'm just observing the issues. But I've certainly seen plenty of fights in the kitchens over chefs not making any money and servers just balling out of control. And you always hear the comeback of, well, it evens out in the end. Like, we make a lot now, but y'all make a steady weight. No. If you've ever done payroll at a restaurant, that's not true. You know that your full-time servers are making way more than your full-time cooks. So, I don't know. It's interesting. Tip culture. It's different in America than it is anywhere else. I'd be interested to hear how it is in other places and how they've addressed workplace tension when it comes to money, when it comes to gratuity. So if you're in another country, if you're in Europe or anywhere else, got to speak English. I don't speak any other languages. So, I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear how tip works in other places and what the expectations are and how gratuity is viewed overall. Is this strictly an American issue with gratuity expanding? Because these technologies certainly have to exist elsewhere. Like I said, the Square and Toast and what have you. So, yeah, how's it going industry-wide in other places? I'm not sure. But this is another big issue that we need to be talking about. And who's got the answers? I'm not sure, but we need to be looking for them. All right, that was Chef Talk. I'm Jake. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to be a part of the conversation, and I sincerely hope that you will. Hang in there, chefs.